Okay, thanks, Ella. Well, I'm not having a go at you, Ella, but I think the question or the subject for debate has to be broken down. It doesn't really make sense to talk about tolerate or ban anti-Semitism because it depends what you're talking about. Are you talking about speech? If you're talking about speech, I would take a very permissive attitude. If you're talking about violence, I would say that should be very, very heavily clamped down on. Or are you talking about something else which hasn't really been covered so much in the panel, which is anti-Semitism as a political ideology and how to tackle anti-Semitism as a kind of political ideology? So maybe just to go through those very quickly, I mean, as I've said, I would take a very permissive attitude towards anti-Semitic speech because I think bad speech has to be tackled with other speech. People have to argue against it. So even ideas that others, or most people, including myself, would find abhorrent, like Holocaust denial, for example, I think people should be allowed to say those things, partly because if they say those things openly, then I think it's easier to challenge them. I should also say that I think that the way that Israel is often discussed nowadays is anti-Semitic. So it's not anti-Semitic to say, I don't like Israel's prime minister. It's not anti-Semitic to say, I'm not happy about Israel being having troops in Gaza. But it is anti-Semitic to say that Israel is the personification of evil, the epitome of evil in the world. And a large part of the anti-Israel movement, and I think it's much more accurate to call it an anti-Israel movement than a pro-Palestinian movement, actually does that. It says Israel, well, that's where you get these double standards I think Ruth referred to. Huge double standards in relation to how Israel is discussed. You know, people talk about destroying Israel, but they don't talk about destroying any other kind of nation. So I would say, yes, there should be free speech. I would draw a line, for example, if someone is threatened with murder or rape because they're Jewish, and that's not an academic example. The Jewish chaplain at Leeds University and his wife, the Jewish chaplain happened to have served in the IDF, in the Israel Defense Forces, and when that came out into the open, he was threatened with murder, his wife was threatened with rape. I do not think that should be tolerated. I think that's outside the realm of free speech. And certainly when it gets into the realm of violence, the maximum possible penalty under the law, as far as I'm concerned. So, for example, I'm using British examples here, but obviously you have lots of other examples in America and Canada and elsewhere. In Exeter University, you had Jewish students who were trying to, I think, have some kind of pro-Israel stool, which they're perfectly entitled to do, and they were physically assaulted. That is not free speech. Physical assault is not free speech. It is violence, and it should be treated as violence. And just one quick thing as an aside, I also don't think that having encampments on universities for months on end or disrupting exams is free speech. People might make the argument for that because they say, well, they believe in civil disobedience, and they can make that argument, but it is not free speech. Free speech is about speech, which shouldn't be a surprise. But finally, I think it needs to be understood there is a real political struggle against anti-Semitism that has to be had. And in that sense, I think what's happened in Gaza, and more recently Lebanon and other countries in the region, is much more a catalyst for the re-emergence of overt anti-Semitism than its cause. Because what you have taught at universities is things like critical race theory, post-colonial theory, all these ideas, and even when they're not taught as overtly anti-Semitic theories, they're just taught in a relatively kind of neutral way, they often leave the way open to anti-Semitic interpretations. So if you believe that the most important thing in relation to individuals is the identity group that people belong to, and you believe that Jews are privileged, they have what sometimes sociologists call a spoiled identity, Jews are hyper-privileged compared to the rest of society, even when it's not drawn out that that is an anti-Semitic belief, it very much leads itself to anti-Semitism. So those ideas need to be challenged. Or in relation to colonialism, you have a whole academic area of post-colonial studies, taught at places like Columbia in New York, most of all, but lots of other places too. Columbia is just a real kind of center for the whole thing. So you say colonialism is the ultimate evil in the world, and Israel is a settler colonial state, So it's very easy to draw the conclusion from that Israel is the most evil country in the world. And you even get people like, I don't know if people have seen the discussion, maybe a bit more of an American discussion, but it has had coverage here, of Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's a black American writer, seen as a kind of real anti-racist kind of writer. He spent 10 days in Israel, which obviously makes him an expert in the subject, only spoke to people who he agreed with, and then drew the conclusion that the situation in Israel is comparable to the Jim Crow laws, the kind of discriminatory laws you had in the American South, completely racist kind of laws. So it's very easy from those kind of premises to draw anti-Semitic conclusions. So really, just to conclude, I think, yes, free speech in relation to anti-Semitism. People should be allowed to say abominable things. Violence, no. If people engage in violence, they should be dealt with very severely. But we also need to conduct a political struggle against anti-Semitism, which takes us full circle because we need free speech in order to do that effectively.
Wonderful, thank you.